It's 1988. The world is a different place. There's no internet, no smartphones, just you, your friends, and a gray plastic box called the Nintendo Entertainment System. Sega Master System if you had that at the time, but most people had the NES. So as usual, you're sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, that old CRT hums, and you've picked up a game called Contra. And then, bam, you're dropped into the jungle. There's no fancy tutorial, no voice acting, just you and your reflexes. As bullets zip across the screen, enemies leap out of nowhere, turn spew fire, all it takes is one hit and you're gone. And after you exhaust all 3 of your lives, you're back to the start of the level. And even though the game is hard, you don't give up. And after being frustrated over and over not being able to get to the end, you pull out your trump card. Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, and start. And suddenly you have 30 lives. That's right, 30. It's like a cheat from the gaming gods themselves. So now you're ready to breeze through the game. Of course, we're talking about Contra, a game that is famous for its run and gun platforming gameplay and famous Contra Code. So today we're going on a mission to uncover the complete history of Contra on the NES. We'll explore how it was made, we'll talk about the famous Contra Code, and we'll look at a ton of spin-offs that resulted from the awesome game. So relax, sit back, because this is the story of Contra. Now before Contra became a famous game on the NES, it got its start in the loud, colorful world of arcades in the late 1980s. The year is 1987. Arcades are everywhere, neon lights glow in the dark rooms, and the air smells like popcorn. Kids and teens would gather in these groups lining up with pockets full of quarters or tokens, and they were all eager for the next big challenge, ready to prove who was the best at whatever game they were playing. Now this was a perfect place for a game like Contra to make its debut. Konami released their original Contra arcade game in 1987. And right away, it stood out. It wasn't just another boring over-the-top shooter or simple platformer. It had bright, detailed graphics that looked amazing for the time. The characters were big and easy to see, with careful designs that brought them to life. But graphics weren't all that made Contra special. The game was packed with massive and creepy alien bosses that looked like they crawled straight out of your worst nightmare. Also, there were enemy robots and monstrous bosses at the end of each level. And each boss was designed to be unforgettable, so players would tell their friends. And the sound was just as impressive. Explosions boomed, lasers fired, and the music kept your heart pounding. Every time you shot an enemy, there was a satisfying blast that made you feel like a real hero. One of the coolest parts though, the 2-player co-op. This meant you didn't have to fight the game alone, and in this game, the arcade version of Contra, you needed a buddy with you. You and a friend could play together side by side working as a team. In the arcade, this was a huge deal. So it wasn't Double Dragon big, but Contra was still a social event. So the story of Contra is you control Bill Riser and Lance Bean, 2 tough commandos. They were super soldiers who looked ready for anything, and the mission was pretty straightforward. Stop the Red Falcon organization, an evil group with plans to unleash an alien invasion on Earth. Now, that totally sounds like an action movie plot. Well, that's the exact point of the game. Contra was heavily inspired by some of the biggest and coolest movies in the 1980s. Taking a little bit from the movie Commando, the jungle settings and muscle-bound commandos were clearly a nod to this movie. Just like Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, Bill and Lance were strong, determined, and armed to the teeth. It also took a chapter out of Aliens. The bosses in Contra often looked like a twisted version of the xenomorphs from the movie. H.R. Geiger's creepy, biochemical designs and big influence on how the game's aliens look. And lastly, we gotta give a shout out to Rambo. The idea of a 1-man, or 2-man if you play with 2 people, army fighting an endless wave of enemies was straight out of all these movies. Bill and Lance survived all odds no matter how many enemies came at them. So Konami's designers even gave Bill and Lance a familiar look. Fans at the time noticed that Bill looked suspiciously like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Lance seemed to resemble Sylvester Stallone. And obviously this was no accident. Konami wanted players to feel like they were stepping into an over-the-top action blockbuster. So before Contra ever blasted its way into living rooms on the NES, it was already a hit in the arcades. It was exciting, loud, and thrilling to play. A perfect match for the wild, action-packed spirit of the 1980s. And this was only the beginning of what would become of the most legendary run-and-gun games of all time. Now, like we said earlier, Contra was already a massive hit in the arcades, and the arcade version had amazing graphics, booming sound effects, and the intense run-and-gun action that made you keep pumping in quarters. Not to mention the difficulty. The arcade Contra was super hard. But that's okay though, because the action was non-stop, and players didn't mind blasting through alien armies to save the world. But bringing Contra home was no small task. The Nintendo Entertainment System wasn't as powerful as the arcade machine, of course, and the NES had big limits. It could only show a few colors at a time compared to the arcade, it couldn't handle too many moving objects without flickering, and it had much simpler hardware. Most people thought that porting arcade games to the NES meant they would look worse or even play worse, and many ports back then lost what made them fun. But Konami wasn't going to let Contra fail. They had a clever plan. The developers obviously knew they couldn't just copy the arcade game exactly, and instead they focused on what really mattered. 3 key items. Number 1, keep the intense, challenging gameplay, make the music memorable just like the arcade was, and you definitely had to support 2 players at once, just like the arcade. So first, they simplified the graphic. The arcade Contra had detailed backgrounds full of color. On the NES, the backgrounds were less detailed, but carefully designed to set the mood. And I feel like they captured that pretty well. You had the dark caverns, enemy bases, and the alien layers still felt dangerous and exciting, even with fewer colors. Now, enemies lost some detail too. In arcades, they looked sharp and scary. On the NES, they used simpler shades, but Konami made sure they still looked threatening enough to make you worry when they ran at you. And then the iconic music. The NES could only play a few notes at a time, but Konami's composers turned that limit into a strength. They wrote these intense 8-bit songs with catchy, driving beats that players never forgot. And then one of the biggest wins for Konami was keeping the 2-player mode intact. Lots of NES games removed co-op play to make development easier, but Contra was all about teamwork, and Konami knew players would want and need to play the game with their friends. And then they even tweaked the level design slightly. Some areas were adjusted to make the pacing better on the NES. I mean, in my opinion, the game actually moved a little faster on NES as opposed to the arcade. And that meant players wouldn't get bored or frustrated with awkward sections. So when Contra was finally ready and launched for the NES in 1988, it was a massive hit. Kids didn't care that it wasn't as pretty as the arcade version. If I'm being honest with you, a lot of kids at that time never even played the arcade version. Contra was actually discovered by most people on the NES, and it was fun, and that's all that mattered. And it became one of the best examples of how to port an arcade game to a home console. Even today, retro gaming fans praise Konami for pulling off what many thought was impossible. So Contra wasn't just a copy of an arcade game, it was a masterpiece and adaptation of creativity. So let's go into the plot. I mean, it's not very complicated, but that's exactly what makes it so memorable. Contra, you can choose to play as Bill Riser or Lance Bean. And just like the arcade, they're part of an elite commando unit trained for the toughest of missions. Basically, they're 80s action movie heroes. Their mission begins in a remote jungle. They've been sent there because something strange is happening. Intelligence reports say that there's a dangerous enemy force taking over the area, but no one knows exactly what they're up against. And their enemy, the Red Falcon. They're a powerful alien entity with plans to conquer the Earth. And they're hiding on this remote island, building an army of brainwashed soldiers and biomechanical monsters. And by the time you reach the final stage, you're not in the jungle anymore. The setting has transformed completely, and now you're inside an alien hive. The walls are made of fleshy, pulsing tissue, egg-like pods that hang from the ceiling. And the final boss, totally unforgettable. A giant beating alien heart in the center of a grotesque lair. And you have to destroy the heart itself to stop the Red Falcon for good. And at the time in the 80s, that was a big deal, especially if you saw the Aliens movies. And just like that, the game's over and you see some credits roll. So let's talk about the levels. Level 1, you got the jungle. And this is the most famous level in Contra. You got the green vines everywhere, waterfalls in the background, enemy bunkers firing at you. And this stage taught players the basics, basically how to jump and how to shoot in all directions. Level 2 and 4 base stages are a little different. These stages were mind-blowing for the time, so instead of moving sideways, the screen pushed into a base, and players had to shoot barriers that blocked their path. So enemies hid in bunkers and shot back, electrified walls forced you to dodge carefully, and for NES players in the 1980s, this felt, I guess, the best they could do with 3D. It was a whole different orientation and facing your enemies head on. Level 3, we got the waterfall, and instead of moving left and right, you get a little bit of platforming. You climb upward. Grenades rain down, enemies drop from above, platforms were tiny and easy to miss if you weren't careful, and one wrong jump and you fell all the way down to your screaming death. So it could be a test of timing and nerves. Level 5, we had the snowfield, and here you fought through icy terrains. Enemies attacked from every side while you trudged across the frozen ground. And you had tanks you had to destroy, you had the white snowy background, and it made bullets hard to see at times, adding to the chaos. Level 6, we got the energy zone, and this level was pure danger. You had giant flamethrowers burst from the walls and floors, and players had to time their runs perfectly to avoid from being burned alive. And all the while, enemies just keep respawning in this game. Soldiers attacked in waves, trying to push you back and get a cheap shot. Level 7, we got the hangar, and by this point, the game expected you to know everything. You had the conveyor belts, the spikes coming down from the ceilings, and enemies rushed at you from both sides. Think of it like the final exam of your Contra skills. One wrong move, and you're dead. And lastly, we have the alien layer, level 8. The final level was a total surprise for many players. So, because gone were the soldiers and the bases, now the walls were made of alien flesh, and you had those creepy eggs that hatched right in front of you. At the end, you face a giant beating alien heart. You had to destroy it while aliens spawned and attacked from every direction. And for some kids in the 80s, this was actually terrifying, yet awesome at the same time. So real quick, we'll talk about the weapons. So Contra wasn't just about shooting, It was about shooting with style. Players could grab power-ups by shooting special flying capsules. And here are some of the weapons everyone remembers. You got the machine gun, and you hold down the fire for rapid shots. And honestly, this is one of my favorite weapons in the game, and it's perfect for mowing down enemies. Next up, you got the spread gun, and that's a fan favorite. That weapon is almost broken and OP in this game. It fires a wide arc, hitting many enemies everywhere at the same time. Nextly, you got one of the least loved weapons, but it has its place in the game in my opinion. You got the laser. It's slow, but extremely powerful, and it can take out big threats really quick. And lastly, you got the fireball, which is probably one of the most boring weapons in the game. It spirals in circles and it's great for hitting, and it kind of does good for hitting weird angles or tight spaces, so each weapon has its own place. The only thing that sucked was if you died, you lost your special weapon, and then you started back off with the pea shooter. So you try to hold on to those power-ups as long as you could. And smart players that memorized all the attack patterns of the enemies, they could take a spread shot and make it all the way to the end of the game. So Contra wasn't just another NES game, it was a test of skill, memory, and reflexes. And at the time, it set the gold standard for run and gun games for years to come. So with all that said, Contra was actually pretty challenging on NES at the time, because I mean, now we've memorized everything. You could blow through the game with the default starting level. But back in the day, people were still trying to memorize patterns. You needed a little help. So this segues into the nowadays famous Contra code: up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start. So let's go ahead and talk about that real quick. Those 10 button presses changed video game history forever. And if you ask almost anyone about the game Contra, there's one thing they'll remember before anything else: the Konami Code, or also known sometimes as the Contra Code. And the Konami Code wasn't just a random cheat. It was a lifeline. Enter it on the title screen of Contra, and you go from having just 3 lives to a whopping 30. And for most kids back in the 80s and 90s, those 30 lives just weren't helpful. They were essential. Contra was famously hard, like cheap shenanigans hard. So you only got 3 lives by default, 3. And that's all you got to survive wave after wave of enemies, traps, and bosses. Then you have one-hit deaths with this game. 1 hit, and that's it. Touch a bullet, fall off a platform, game over for that life. And also, you had limited continues. Run out of continues, and back to the start. Obviously, kind of hardcore, no mercy. And most players at the time couldn't finish Contra without the code. It turned an almost impossible mission into something beatable. Suddenly, you could see levels you never reached before. You could actually finish the game and see the ending. But the magic of the Konami Code didn't stop at Contra. Konami, the company that made the game, loved this code so much that they hid it in many of their other games. And we'll take a look at a few. You had games like Gradius 2. All you had to do was similar to Contra at the beginning of the game, put in your Contra code or Konami code: up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start, and you're playing with 30 characters. And it even carried over to the SNES on some of their games. For example, Gradius 3. And we'll see here what happens when we put the code in. Whoa, that wasn't supposed to happen. The code was so cool that Konami actually trolled us in certain games with the code, like Gradius 3. I remember playing this one back in the day, and when I got the game, obviously I thought the Contra code could work, and I put it in, or Konami code, if you will, and I put it in, and it's a certain way you have to do it. So when you do it like you normally would standardly with older games, it'll show where because you don't get 30 minutes in this game. What you get is all your power ups. So when you do the code, you push pause and you put the code in, and then you'll get all your items, all your power ups for your ship, but the ship will explode and you lose life. The correct way to do it, like I'll show you here, is you do everything the same: up, up, down, down, but when you get to the left, right part, you hit the shoulder buttons. Okay, so that's how you actually pull that off, by hitting the shoulder button, and then BA and start. Then you'll get all your stuff. So yeah, but that's how famous the code was, that Konami actually put that into a game and pretty much trolled us, or trolled anybody that tried to do it. So I thought that was pretty funny at the time. And even today, people know the Konami code. Even if they never even played Contra at all, they still know that code at least. And it's been printed on t-shirts, hidden in websites, referenced in movies and TV shows. It even pops up in modern games as an Easter egg or a joke. And over the years, the Konami code became more than just a cheat. It became a piece of gaming history, a symbol of an era when games were punishingly hard and kids traded secrets on the playground. It's a shared memory that connects generations of gamers and non-gamers alike. Let's talk about the music real quick. Now, Contra had some killer soundtracks that made every level feel like you were in an action movie. It didn't matter if the NES only had a couple of simple sound chips. The composers used every trick they knew to make it sound exciting and unforgettable. Now, it had some famous tracks like the bass level theme, the jungle theme, and what's even more amazing is the music was actually made with only 3 melody channels and 1 noise channel. That means the composers had to be super creative. and they used fast arpeggios that made it sound like chords, and they layered the sound to create depth. And the music has been iconic. Even today, retro fans love Contra's soundtrack. People remix it, perform it in live synthesizers, or turn it into heavy metal rock concerts. I mean, it's that iconic. So at this point, I figured we should take a look at where Contra started and where Contra ended up. So we're going to take a look at some of the spin-offs they made. There's a brief look at each one. And like I said, if I missed your favorite one, I apologize, because Contra has so many spin-offs. So if we did all the spin-offs, we'd be here forever. So let's dive in and take a quick look at some of the spin-offs that came from this masterpiece of a game. And we'll start with the arcade. Now, the arcade came out in 1987, and this is the original side-scrolling run and gun classic. Players control Commandos Bill Riser and Lance Bean fighting the Red Falcon in Alien Menace. And it's known for fast-paced shooting, 8-way directional fire, and co-op gameplay. And it features the basic stages you would find in the NES version. Jungle, the base, the alien layer stages with boss fights, and this version, in my opinion, is hard as nails. I mean, it helped define the run and gun genre at the time, and it popularized the one-hit death and intense co-op play. Next up, we got the classic we just talked about, the NES 1988 port, and this one came out on the NES. Now, the home adaptation came with significant redesign, but you still kept the iconic levels, the jungle, the waterfall, the snowfield, and introduced the famous Konami Code granting 30 lives. This was the birth of this code, and it improved musical and visuals for the NES hardware. And it came also with tight, responsive controls. The impact this game had became a staple NES title, making Contra a household name. Like I said earlier, this was a lot of kids' first look at Contra. And from this point on, the Konami Code became legendary. Next up, we got Super Contra in the arcade, and this one, it didn't have the same impact as the original Contra because basically, in my opinion, a lot of people played the NES Contra, so when they saw Super C, if you saw it in the arcade, I did play this one. I was actually in a mom and pop shop. I didn't see it in my local arcade. I actually played it in a mom and pop shop. And and this was after I'd played Super C for the NES. But one thing I will give Super Contra is this is the first game to give you the over-the-top 3D isometric view over the top. So kudos to them for that. But I feel like this one didn't hit as hard as the original, but it is a direct sequel to the original Contra. You had new weapons, overhead stages, and the NES reworked stages to fit in 8-bit hardware. This one also had faster pacing than the original and improved the enemy variety. And the impact reinforced the series' reputation for brutally hard but a fair challenge. And NES port Super C is often cited as a top-tier sequel. Next up, we got Super C for the NES, and this game was freaking amazing. I mean, it did everything the first game did, and it also retained that over-the-top view that the arcade version had, and it was, in my opinion, a lot more forgiving, not as hard to me as the original Contra on the NES was, but still a game that was pretty challenging. And it kept a lot of the same graphics, a lot of the same sprites, but just gave you new enemies and a few new weapons. So obviously, thumbs up on this port right here. Next up, we got Operation C for the Game Boy, and this one came out in 1991. And this would be the first handheld Contra you could take on the go. Single player only, didn't have two-player, and the graphics were simplified, but it kept the core gameplay and introduces the homing gun in this one. What fans remember about this one is the strong example of bringing console quality Contra action to portable platforms. This one's praised for its tight design despite limitations. I mean, this one right here, I feel like it moved fast like it was supposed to, and it was an excellent port at the time on the OG Game Boy to carry around and have. I mean, they knocked it out the park with this one for what it was. Now I have to talk about a weird game here, Contra Force. For the NES, it came out late in the NES life cycle of 1992. And this one was, they pulled a fast one here, okay? Originally, this was an unrelated game in Japan called Archound, and it localized as Contra Force in the West. And it features like modern urban terrorism instead of aliens, and it's slower, more tactical gameplay, but you do get 4 selectable characters, and you can switch weapons mid-game. The impact this one had, I was kind of pissed when I rented this one, and I thought it was Contra because it's got Contra, you know, and I looked at it and I played it, and it was kind of like, this ain't Contra. It's just, but at the time I didn't know what it was in Japan either, but I had to take it for face value and believe that it was Contra, but it was probably a really crappy game, and I wouldn't find out till later that it was Archound in Japan. But yeah, this is kind of one of those Super Mario Bros. 2 things. It just didn't work out though. This version of the game sucked. So this isn't really a true Contra sequel, but it just wears the Contra logo. So Yeah, this one kind of sucks, guys. I ain't gonna lie. I wasn't a big fan of this one. And next up, we have one of my favorites. We have Contra Hard Corps for the Sega Genesis. And this one was freaking awesome. It's set in 2641 with cyborg enemies and multiple endings in this game. And you have 4 playable characters with each having unique weapons. Each one has story branching paths. And this game is tough as nails. But the visuals and soundtrack make up for it. It's definitely worth playing. I mean, this one turned out to be a cult classic for its challenge and replay value, and it showcased, in my opinion, the Genesis hardware capabilities. They had a few games like this, like Castlevania Bloodlines, which is pushing the Genesis as far as it can go, and this was another one, Contra Hard Corps. This one was just like over the top and super fun to play and super fast. It was just an awesome game. If you never played this one, definitely give this one a shot because it's just like one of the better in the Contra series, in my opinion. And then obviously we had for Super Nintendo, Contra 3, the Alien Wars. And what else do we got to say about this one? This was like, in my opinion, my favorite out of the Contra series altogether. I mean, I made a video on this back before. Probably needs an update to that video, but Contra 3 was just, it sucks you in. It probably has, in my opinion, this is my opinion, the best music out of all the Contra games, even though it's on the Super NES and they would be games later on, but it's been remixed, remastered. And yes, I do have the Contra 3 official vinyl. Okay, it's pretty nice. It comes with the record, A and B side, and it sounds amazing in vinyl. I mean, yes, this OST slaps. It's that serious. And as far as the gameplay goes, it's just as good, if not better, than the OST. I mean, this one has like, it's non-stop adrenaline junkie gameplay. I mean, non-stop action. It's never a slow point. I mean, you might climb for a little bit. So Contra 3 Alien Wars delivers big time. This is probably definitely a fan favorite. And next up for the PS1, we have Contra Legacy of War. This one was this was the first fully 3D isometric Contra, and this was a PlayStation 1. A lot of people said it had awkward controls, and the perspective made it hard to play, but it did offer new characters and new settings. You had 4 characters you can choose from, and it was an attempt to modernize the series, but in a lot of people's opinion, it just fell flat. The impact, widely panned big time for losing classic Contra feel. It's often cited as a low point in the series. I don't tend to think that. I feel like I played that game. I don't think it's the worst. I feel like at the time it was just something different. I mean, most people were used to the run and gun style of Contra. It did have over the top 3D view in certain stages, but this whole game's like that. And I think this game to me was kind of probably ahead of its time. It would come other games like Cannon Spike for the Dreamcast with the Capcom Street Fighter characters. Excellent game, and that style of gameplay would come into play later on, but I think with it being, I think if it wasn't called Contra, called anything else, it would have been okay. But since it was called Contra, people who expected it to play like Contra, and it didn't. So I think that's kind of why this game, in a lot of people's opinions, sucked. But I enjoyed it. I'm probably one of the few people that enjoyed it, but I thought it was a pretty cool game. Next up, we got the Contra Adventure, and this one came out in 1998, and this is a sequel to the Legacy of War. Now this one mixed 2D side-scrolling with 3D exploration and behind-the-back shooting. The controls were sluggish in this game, kind of. They weren't the best, but they weren't like too bad, but they were a little sluggish. And people criticized this one worse than its predecessor. So it submitted the PlayStation era as a misstep for the series. Kind of like Tecmo Bowl, PlayStation Tecmo Bowl, which was pretty bad. This one's often regarded as the worst Contra game ever. I'm gonna have to sign off on that. This is probably not a horrible game in my opinion, but out of all the Contra games, this one probably, except for that fake Contra game that came out that's not even Contra, but outside of that, this is probably the worst in the game. Not the worst game I ever played, but it's kind of boring. It really doesn't do too much of anything. It tries to do a lot of different things, but doesn't do any of it well. And it's kind of feels like it went backwards for this version of Contra. So if you never played this one, you didn't miss anything. And next up, we got a cool one. We have for the PlayStation 2, ContraShattered Soldier. And this one returned to the classic 2D side-scrolling with modern visuals for the PS2. Kind of like a 2.5D. And this one has a darker storyline with post-apocalyptic tone, and you have limited weapons that can be switched at will. You have a grading system based on performance, and this game can be kind of tough, but it's not so hard that it's unfair. It's just a little challenging. And the reception for this one was praised as a return to form. The king has returned, and became a cult favorite among hardcore players of Contra. But obviously, I have to say back then, and this game was super fun. This one and the other one, the next one for the PS2, super fun games. If you missed these, because PlayStation 2 at the time was just a blast. They had a lot of, I guess, rebirth of games like Alter Beast, Contra, of course, Shinobi. They had that rebirth of more modernized games, and I feel like they did a really good job with Contra here. So if you never played Contra for the PS2 and you can find this one, or you can emulate it, definitely give both of these games a try. But I think at this point, the generation that grew up playing Contra, we were all grown-ups at that time. So Contra was kind of like, but there was so much other good stuff to play on the PlayStation 2 that these two games might have slipped through the radar. They're definitely, if you ever go back and play them, definitely worth your time. Next up, we got NeoContra for the PS2, and this one right here is a top-down isometric twin-stick gameplay. Over-the-top bosses, and it's actually kind of humorous at times with the samurai riding helicopters. You got simplified shooting mechanics in this one, and there's a wild, kind of like a sci-fi setting with actually some pretty good cutscenes. Now, this one was a little bit on the fence. It kind of divided fans. It was fun, but it was actually, in my opinion, kind of different from the rest. You know, it was kind of seen, I guess you can call it like an experiment on Contra's gameplay style, but overall, still a really fun game. I mean, graphics were on point, and just a cool game altogether. So let's get into the bite-sized versions of Contra. You have Contra 3 Alien Wars Remake for the GBA, and I feel like for the GBA, they killed it, man. This one plays a lot, real true to its bigger brother. I mean, obviously you had to cut some stuff out because it's a GBA, but for what it was, I mean, the music was pretty good for the GBA, and it also carried over most of the stuff that was in the Super Nintendo version. So thumbs up on this one. If you want to take it on the go, I mean, obviously you can take NES or Super NES games on the go nowadays, but back then it was still kind of a big deal to have portable versions with you. I feel like GBA definitely satisfied that Contra 3 itch, if that was your thing. And next up, we have Contra 4 for the Nintendo DS, and this was another portable handheld version of Contra, and this was the true 2D sequel set after Contra 3. And you had the vertical dual screen levels using the grappling hook. That was a new addition to this game. You had classic power-ups, the spread, the laser shot, and this one can be extremely challenging as well. And it also had unlockables in it. You could unlock the NES Contra and Super C ports. I mean, that was pretty cool for a handheld. And the impact this one had, loved as a modern love letter to the classic games. So this was definitely a cool throwback. Majority, I mean, you had other ones. You had the console, you had the Contra that came out in 2009 for the WiiWare, you had that. So what are my final thoughts on Contra? Contra is just like an icon, you know. It was a game that, even without the Konami Code, it was still a classic game. I think you pair that with the now famous Konami Code. You have 30 men and you have 3 continues. That's 120 men to beat the game. I mean, anybody can do it. I mean, now there's maybe some people that now if you burned out your continues with 120 men, I'm not even gonna talk about it. Nobody's done that. Everybody's beat the game with 120 men. But what it did was, what's cool, it got everybody, just like vanilla players who really don't play video games, to just hop in so a buddy could play with you, and it kind of exposed them to gaming and exposed them to Contra. So it brought in a lot of new players because the game, like little brothers, little sisters, or whoever wanted to play with you, because you both were going to beat the game. You could even carry your buddy with you. So yeah, so the Contra Code will go on to do and will go into pop culture, 80s culture, 90s culture, and it's still around to this day. So all the spin-offs it had, Contra, the one thing it kind of stayed that it normally did was side-scrolling and over-the-top 3D view, if you will. 3D, some games didn't have 3D, but over-the-top isometric view. And it just stayed in that same realm. So when you hear Contra, you know that it's run and gun style gameplay, and it might be 3D over the top, but it's always the same game, and it's always fun. It's always a fun recipe. So it's kind of hard to mess Contra up. And out of all the spin-offs, there's only like a 1 or 2 that kind of didn't live up to the Contra name, but for the most part, very fun game. So definitely had tons of memories playing this game, and this one goes down obviously as a video game classic and legend of the game. So that's gonna do it with Contra deep dive review into that game. But let me know in the comments your experience with Contra. Were you an OG that played it in the arcade first? Because back to me with that. First time I played Contra was the NES. I saw Contra in the arcade after the fact and then played it later. So my first time playing it was actually on the NES. So yeah. And then when I played the arcade, it was kind of harder. I didn't like it as much. It was hard. You only had so many continues and there was no 30 men. So yeah. So for me, I feel like the NES was my first experience with it. But let me know in the comments what was yours and what was your thoughts. That's gonna do it for this one. As always, guys, take care of yourself, protect your inner peace. God bless you, and we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.